Some new evidence has recently come to light which might support this theory. I was contacted a few weeks ago by a man whose Muslim friend was at a Thameslink line station on the morning of 7/7. He was of Muslim appearance and waiting on the platform at Gatwick station. At 10 a.m. he was singled out by 10 armed police bearing large MP5 submachine guns, wearing black bulletproof vests and white shirts. They were pointing their guns straight at him, and he feels quite lucky to still be alive. He has documentary evidence to prove he was apprehended at this location and at that time. Now, let's just assume that the alleged bombers who were stranded at King's Cross, not knowing what to do after real bombs had gone off, headed back to the Thameslink platform from which they had got off earlier. This isn't unreasonable. Remember, they had very little knowledge of London, and it is more likely they would flee to a known route, perhaps retracing their tracks. If they went back to the same platform and jumped on the first train, this would be a Thameslink line train heading south. Such a train would go to Gatwick and could explain why the Muslim man was mistakenly apprehended at gunpoint at the Thameslink Gatwick platform at 10 a.m. The authorities could have easily tracked the men to the Thameslink train using either CCTV or mobile phone positions. Looking at the Thameslink route map, they perhaps thought Gatwick might be a likely destination for the fleeing patsies. But if the patsies changed trains at London Bridge to get on the Jubilee line, where does this go? You guessed it, Canary Wharf, where they were shot at around 10:30 a.m. The time of 10 a.m. at Gatwick ties in with the bombers fleeing south on the Thameslink line at about 9:10 a.m., which is 20 minutes after the bombs went off. If they left King's Cross at 9:10 a.m. on a Thameslink train, that would get them to London Bridge by 9:35. Allowing 15 minutes at London Bridge station, they would have arrived at Canary Wharf at about 10 a.m. This gets them to Canary Wharf in time to be shot, as reported in various newspapers, at 10:30 a.m.
Brought over from Northern Ireland, a bunch of killer thugs, and their bomb-making skills from Northern Ireland, I think they're likely as any candidates for who set up the whole bombs on the July 7th, I think they're likely to have shot down those lads at Canary Wharf.
If we look at Tony Blair and Ian Blair, you believe that they probably knew the whole scope of the false flag terror attack. You think that?
Well, the evidence points to that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say conclusively that they did know.
Right.
For obvious reasons, only they know whether they did know, and the people that would have told them if they, if they did know. I can't definitively say that they did know, but all the evidence points to the fact that they had foreknowledge of it, which means that they must have been in on it to have foreknowledge. Tony Blair came out immediately and started blaming the Muslims.
Yes.
When the news media were reporting that it was power surges.
I'd weighed up which story I believed,
yeah.
And on balance, I was totally persuaded,
yeah.
as far as, almost as near certain as you can be,
mm-hmm.
that the government versions of both 9/11, the respective government versions of 9/11 and 7/7 were becoming so ridiculous,
yeah.
surrendered and totally unreliable, and that I don't know exactly how everything happened. There were far more plausible hypotheses out there that explained the situation and completely debunked the
mm-hmm.
government stories.
Yes.
And that was being covered up now. And I couldn't, in my conscience, I couldn't do anything that would countenance the perpetuation of that lie.
They've recently announced that there's going to be an inquest. The inquest they're having now is to try and find out if the authorities could have done anything to prevent it. So they've set the terms of the inquest to ignore the real problem.
What happened?
Assumptions should not be made in an inquest.
Well, right.
Which was that the lads were guilty.
Yeah, the purpose of the inquest is to ascertain the cause of death. And one of the most shattering facts that emerged in this inquest was that no post-mortems had been done on the bodies. Hollywood give evidence, and there's no evaluation of the evidence. There's no weighing of the scales of justice. We're told right at the start who did it, and you just got a smarmy lawyer introducing all sorts of witnesses, and Lady Justice Hallett giving a certain decorum and dignity to the event, making sure everyone feels okay, nobody's insulted, everyone's treated right, and nobody is there to evaluate what is said.
All right.
There's no conclusion at the end of it.
So the
official line is totally laid down, and there's no doubt about the official line. Nobody can doubt or query the official line, and everyone's supposed to be happy now that it's over.
The coaches themselves were destroyed.
Yeah, that was a criminal act. 1 year after the event, they were stored for a bit, then 1 year after, this is a totally crucial evidence, they were destroyed. And throughout all the debates of where were the holes in the floor, the holes keep moving, people are unsure, there's never any hint that anybody can go and look at the coach and see where the hole is.
So number 5 in purple, that's the alleged bomber, Shazid Tanweer.
And there's the famous testimony of Bruce Late, who's number 18 here, and he clearly says that he remembers the people sitting around him, and there was no Muslim and no rucksack in sight. Somebody come in 12 hours after the event, 7/7, when all the living people had been removed, and counted the number of dead. And he said 7. There's definitely 7 dead bodies in this train, no more, no less. And he swore that on oath. Now, at the inquest, those 7 dead are all real people who are identified. Okay? So they haven't got any body left over that they can say, this is the terrorist. So if they're going to argue the terrorist is there, he has to be blown into so many different pieces that the person counting the bodies, who comes in after the tragedy, does not count him as a body.
What amazes me is number 3 and number 8, 2 people stood right next to the alleged bomber, both survived without a scratch.
Yeah, he got out, climbed out through the window.
So this is William Walsh.
I think his leg was a bit damaged. He had to go to hospital for treatment, but for a leg.
Right.
So he did have a bit of harm. But the point is, he was absolutely sitting right next to where the rucksack was allegedly blown up, and he got up and walked away. This is very similar to what happens with Lindsay, who is on the Piccadilly line.
Right.
Lindsay, as we'll come to it, is right in a corner, and there's a whole lot of absurd ID they put around Lindsay of, passport, birth certificate, telephone bill, as if he'd have all that stuff with him, and bottles of hydrogen peroxide, of course, it shows terrorist. And there's a guy right next to him called Mr. Obi somebody. He's right in the far corner here, 108, 109, and beside him is this Mr. Obi, who just gets up and walks away.
Right. So he doesn't see anyone detonating a bomb or anything like that, and he's stood right next to the alleged bomber.
No, not at all. And if viewers are shown this picture, it's terribly important because they put the blast between the 2 sets of double doors, which is about 10 feet away from where they're putting the body of Tanweer. They've got 26 people killed. That one was absolutely jam-packed, that carriage.
Right.
26 people killed, and huge hole in the floor. And then they got the terrorist nowhere near that hole. The position where they put Khan is supposed to be at Edgware Road, is nowhere near any of those holes. He has to be located.
He's the one who last week we suggested wasn't even there.
He wasn't even there. No, of course
okay,
not. He's put on a bunch of 4 seats by himself. They have no one else sitting. No one else sitting around him because they don't want any witnesses to be questioned, saying no, I didn't see Khan, and no, I'm not blown to bits. Let me emphasise that in all these train stories, the most haunting, horrific factor that keeps reappearing is people with legs and feet blown off. This is what the government and the media totally ignore throughout this inquest, just as they totally ignored it back in the 2006 Greater London Assembly hearing. And you got testimony at the inquest from the driver, Ray Whitehurst. This is the first time he's allowed to appear in public, the first time we hear the name of the driver of this train, okay? And he describes what he experienced. It was a lift. He got lifted up.
So the question never got asked at the inquest, well, look, why is there more than one hole so far apart?
No intelligent question at all got asked at the inquest.
I heard that no post-mortems were carried out on any of the victims.
Yeah, so how can you have a 5-month inquest without any post-mortems? Well, this was a bit astounding, and we heard at the inquest some pathologists giving testimony and being astounded to be told there were no post-mortems.
The smokescreen inquest into the 7/7 tube bombings recently came to an end on the 3rd of March 2011, which conveniently ignored the most important question, which is, Were the alleged bombers guilty? The reason why they avoided this question is blatantly obvious when you look at the actual evidence. It is because they were totally innocent. The 7/7 terror attacks on London, give us your opinion.
I think it was a government inside job, either done by the government itself or the government maybe threaten the people involved into doing it.
Okay.
I guess it it ties into continued to get continued support for the involvement in Iraq.
Okay.
And Afghanistan.
The 9/11 terror attacks. Yeah. So what's your belief as to who caused them?
I just think it was the American government trying to do it so they can justify actually going to Iraq, starting a war.
Okay. And
when they think if there's weapons of mass destruction and then they find none,
yeah.
Obviously there's something going on, isn't there?
Okay, we've just finished surveying some of the people here in Durham, and we've managed to get opinions from 50 members of the public, which sounds quite simple, but it's actually quite difficult. A lot of people just walk straight past you. Now, a lot of people said they thought both 7/7 and 9/11 was carried out by Al-Qaeda, but many of those people would then qualify that by saying, oh, that's what they tell us, or that's what I've read. A lot of them weren't firmly convinced of what they were saying, or at least that's the impression that I got. A lot of people, quite a high percentage, said they didn't know who caused either of the attacks, and there were a few people out of the 50 who actually said that they believe it was orchestrated by the government. Yes, ma'am.
Quickly ask what your take was about de Menezes, about the assassination.
De Menezes, yeah.
Well, you think he knew something, yeah, and he had to be got rid of?
Yeah.
Or
well, that's a conjecture. Nobody knows, basically. Nobody knows what the link is. But
about 2 weeks after 7/7, that he was murdered, and he wasn't just...
I mean, it was overkill, pure
overkill.
Overkill.
It was total overkill.
It looks as if it wasn't the police who gunned him down. It was some special
unit which you've identified.
Well, various newspapers said that the Force Reconnaissance Regiment, that's a very new counter-terror unit.
The
set
Force...
up, FRR.
FRR. He was an electrician. It smells to me that he was involved, either he knew about the placement of the bombs in 7/7 or he was involved.
That's what I think, yeah.
British police are not into gunning someone down with 7 bullets in the head with special dum-dum bullets that explode on impact, and with 7 bullets shot slowly. That isn't the way the British police do things. Mm-hmm. But they haven't been allowed to deny it.
So the FRR, would they just be above the British law then?
I think so, yeah.
Mohammed Siddiqui Khan,
yeah,
that's it.
He was actually friendly with the MP.
Yep, he was. He went to the Houses of Parliament. He was given a tour of the Houses of Parliament.
I personally think they were set up like.
Yeah, well, the guy who set them up was called Rashid Aswat, and he's in Broadmoor now, because he was an MI6 agent, Muslim, but was working for MI6, and he was, I believe, he was the one who lured them into this plot, and he telephoned them 20 times on the morning of 7/7. When it happened, he got on a plane and left the country. There's a photograph in your book where it goes whitewater rafting. Yeah. And the mainstream media try to make that out to be the alleged bombers bonding on this whitewater rafting.
You've got to laugh, haven't you?
And I had a postgraduate qualification in criminal intelligence analysis as well as a degree in applied statistics. So I was reasonably well qualified, right, and trusted. So I was saying, let me show you. I can prove what I'm saying. Makes sense. Now, as an analyst, if I was to approach this problem, well, let's look at what happened. Tony Blair, Jack Straw, what did they do? Straight away. This has all the hallmarks of an Al-Qaeda attack on the day of the 7/7. Now, this was before any statement had been articulated by the police as to what was happening. Mm-hmm. So Tony Blair from Glen Eagles, immediately on record, this is all the hallmarks from Al-Qaeda. Well, I'm sorry. I'm a principal intelligence analyst, and when I've stood back and look at this close up, right, this has all the hallmarks of an inside job, right? So what would be my approach to prove that conceptual model beyond reasonable doubt? Mm-hmm. Well, we have a whole range of indicators. We've mentioned many. And what I would do was list those facts that have happened on 7/7, undeniable facts. Right? And against those facts, we would weigh up, does that fact point towards one direction as another?
Islamic
Those two
terrorism,
directions, does it point toward, more towards Islamic terrorism and Al-Qaeda, as the government would have us believe, or internal tyranny? And I would actually score that accordingly against every single fact that was pertinent that's happened. Now, nobody would be able to dispute the facts, but my analysis would conclude that fact that we can't dispute clearly points towards a cover-up rather than an Islamic terrorism attack. Now, it doesn't, on its in isolation, it doesn't prove it.
Yeah.
It doesn't prove that it was an inside job.
Yeah.
But cumulatively, what you would expect if the government were telling the truth, that everything would be loaded towards supporting the government. But there's 1,001 reasons why you could state systematically that point more towards an inside job.
Even if we could, say, prove that all this is true, and I don't think there's much doubt about that, how are you going to get the public to accept it? Because so many people live a very nice, cosy life. They believe virtually what the media say and the government. And for this to come out, and this would lead to so many other things, that their whole lives would change dramatically. They wouldn't have anything to believe in, would they?
I've read that in any conflict, only 5% of the population actually take part in the struggle, and the other 95% kind of join the winners, if you like. Or I've also heard figures that once the figure gets to 10% of the population believing that something's true, if it's true, it will then, that's enough to tip the balance. So I don't think we need to wake everyone up.
This reminds me of the sort of conversation in the film, The Matrix, where Morpheus and Neo are talking about the web of illusion that's spun, and do you want to take the red pill and find out what it's really like, or do you want to stay comfortable? I think, to answer your question, anger will motivate people.
The evidence points to a false flag terrorist attack organised by the authorities who planned the terrorist drill. Yes, you heard that right, folks. Our own intelligence services, who are supposed to protect us, are perpetrating acts of terrorism and murdering their own people. Let's just say that again for anyone who didn't quite catch it. Our own intelligence services, who are supposed to protect us, are perpetrating acts of terrorism and murdering their own people. And one more time for luck. Our own intelligence services, who are supposed to protect us, are perpetrating acts of terrorism and murdering their own people. The evidence which supports this statement is abundant.
The government fabricates the terror event.
So you're saying that if justice was seen to be done, the state would have to fall?
Yeah, yeah.
These people are not going to stop doing these false flag terrorist events unless the people actually stop them. And the people have to know what's going on in order to be able to stop them. The only chance we've got of stopping them is when these people know that everybody knows that it's them doing it.